And you've heard this story before. When this particular person found this apple, he consumed and ate the apple. Later on, he thought with himself that this apple that he found on the stream of the river does not belong to him. He wanted to trace the origin of the apple, where it came from. He traced it to a tree in somebody else's garden. He knocked on the door, sought permission that he had consumed an apple that fallen from the tree. The man said to him, "I will give you permission for half of the apple, because the tree that I have is half owned by myself and half owned by someone else, who happens to live in Isfahan." And this person was living in Ahwaz. Between Ahwaz and Isfahan was several days' journey. This man, who was the farmer by the name of Muhammad, he said with himself, "No problem, I will go all the way towards Isfahan to seek permission from that person who co-owns the tree, to say to him that I've had an apple which half of it belongs to you." Imagine. Several days' journey, he went, he reached Isfahan, he knocked on the door, the man came out. He said to him, "Excuse me, I want to ask you for permission, and if you do not give me permission, I'm willing to pay for the apple, or half of the apple that belongs to you." The man said, "Is this the story?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Unfortunately, I can't forgive you." So this person, Muhammad, is thinking, what an expensive apple that I've just ate. He says to him, "Why can't you forgive me?" He said, "The reason is because I want you to do something for me. And if you do it, I will forgive you for the half of the apple that you've eaten." He said, "What is it that you want me to do?" He said, "I have a daughter. She's blind, she's dumb, and she doesn't have the main limbs. She doesn't have arms or feet. And nobody is, of course, proposing. Nobody wants to get married to her. If you get married to her, I'll forgive you for eating half of an apple." You see, sometimes we hear these narratives and stories and we think, some of us say, "Wah wah," others say, "Alhamdulillah," and most of us think, wonderful story, and we move on. But I want you to think, what would you do? If you were in the position of that individual, I guarantee you, most of us will say Khuda Hafiz to that man. And we'll go back home. And we'll think, you know what, it's not worth it. Allah will forgive me. But this person demonstrated his understanding of the responsibilities and the duties. He said, "No problem. If it means you will forgive me, I'll get married to her." So of course the tradition at that time was that they do not meet the bride until after the marriage had taken place. After the nikah had been read, he was told, "Go inside this room and this is where the bride is." He goes inside and he finds his wife completely normal, perfect. She can see, she can speak, her limbs are intact. He wonders with himself. He says to her, "Excuse me, I got the wrong person." He walks out. His father-in-law says, "No, you've got the right person. What I wanted to do is to test you. This daughter of mine has never uttered a lie, and that's why I said she can't speak. She has never seen anything haram. She has never heard anything haram. And she's never gone anywhere which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is disobeyed. Therefore she is yours because you have passed the examination. And I wanted someone who is truly God conscious, a manifestation of piety and taqwa, to get married to her. I couldn't find anyone except you who passed this examination. Therefore she is yours." Why am I telling you this story? Out of this marriage, Muqaddas al-Ardabili was born. And this man, Muhammad, was his father. Muqaddas al-Ardabili, the narrations tell us, when he was in Ahwaz, he was making a journey towards Najaf. And he had hired a donkey. In Ahwaz, someone came to him and said to him, "I want you to carry this letter to someone in Najaf." People in Najaf were waiting for him. It took him several more days to come to Najaf. They wondered what's happened to him. When he eventually arrived, he was exhausted. They said to him, "What's happened?" He said, "Someone came to me and said, 'Take this letter.' I thought with myself, because I've hired the donkey, I have not sought the permission from the owner, because I have told him that I will ride on the donkey. But the weight of the letter, I have not sought permission for. Therefore, I walked from Ahwaz to Najaf." Most of us may dismiss this particular notion, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in this type of dedication and careful attention towards religion, is how knowledge is manifested. So there are people who claim to be knowledgeable. Shaitan was knowledgeable. Muawiyah ibn Sufyan had knowledge. Yet of course the knowledge had no impact. You have people who are buried in the courtyard of Amir al-Mu'mineen by, for instance, the example of Allama Hilli, who has a particular close affinity with myself, just by name. Allama Hilli, of course, many of you know of his famous achievements, his books that he has authored, the fact that he was considered a very established scholar before reaching the age of bulugh. In other words, when he was 9 and 10, he would attend important lessons that were told at that time by, for instance, Al-Muhaqqiq Al-Hilli. Al-Muhaqqiq Al-Hilli, of course, who is his cousin, he would attend the lessons of Muhaqqiq in many different places. But what stood out in Allama Hilli was his wisdom. And of course, some of you have heard the famous tradition that is told that Allama Hilli, when he was 9 years of age, because he was not baligh yet, when his father would run after him to do what? For his father to run after him to study, and he wants to play, he's still a child, he would recite the verses of sajda, which are obligatory. And therefore his father would do sajda, and he would run away. And his father would not catch up with him. Later on, Allama Hilli is now accredited to have been the main element and the reason why Shi'ism spread to Iran. Because there was a famous king who had divorced his wife 3 times. Most of you have heard this story, right? That when he divorced his wife 3 times, he wanted to get back to her. He divorced her out of anger. The madahib of our brothers, the Ahl al-Sunnah, the school of Sahaba, all do not permit this to happen. Therefore he sought a school of thought that allows him to get back to his wife. He was told that there is somebody by the name of Allama Hilli. In Iraq, he called him. He was in Isfahan, this king, the Safawi king. When he came, Allama Hilli entered his majlis. And when he entered, he had his sandals underneath his armpits. And he came and sat next to the king. The people around said to this particular scholar, they said, look at you. You do not even have the basics when it comes to mannerism. Surely you should leave your sandals outside. Why is it that you bring it with you and you sit next to His Majesty the King in such a manner? Allama Hilli says, the reason why I've done this is because we have a narration at the time of the Prophet that the Malikis, those who followed the Maliki school of thought, used to do it. Therefore I'm following them. The Malikis next to Allama Hilli said, you're a liar, you're not talking the truth. Because there were no Malikis at the time of the Prophet. He said, then I'm mistaken. The Shafi'is did it. The Shafi'is objected. They said there were no Shafi'is. Likewise, the Hanbalis and the Hanafites. Each of them were mentioned until eventually Allama Hilli would look at the king and says, O king, I follow a school of thought that were present at the time of the Holy Prophet. I follow the school of Ali ibn Abi Talib. I follow the Ahl al-Bayt, who took from the Prophet directly. And indeed, the king was inspired by the teachings of Allama Hilli. He embraced Shia Islam, and this was the moment whereby Shi'ism spread in Iran from that time. You also have next to the shrine of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and we end here with the famous grave of Ayatollah al-Udma al-Sayyid Abu al-Qasim al-Khou'i. Of course you have Sheikh al-Tusi, who is Sheikh al-Ta'ifah, a great scholar, who has authored 2 out of the 4 Shia canonical books, and is revered and respected, authored hundreds of books that we have today, and some of them are studied in Islamic seminaries. But a contemporary scholar who passed away in 1991, some of you might do his taqleed, and inshallah as we meet Ayatollah Sistani, is one of his close students, is Ayatollah al-Udma Khou'i. The problem is, brothers and sisters, with many of us, if today we are asked about our scholars, if we're asked about, for instance, individuals like those that I've mentioned, many struggle to talk about their lives. Many struggle to narrate any incident. And it's important, as much as we try to learn about our faith, that we admire what these individuals came out to establish. So we look at these people and we study their lives, because they dedicated it so that you and I can practice the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to practice. They brought us the religion. And they were the light, or the source by which the light of Ahl al-Bayt reached us. A story in the life of Ayatollah al-Khou'i. Of course, Ayatollah al-Khou'i does not need any introduction. He was known as the great marja of his time. Many of the ulama today, the great maraja and mujtahids, have directly or indirectly studied under Ayatollah al-Khou'i. One of his students said to me personally this story, just to demonstrate. what I want to get close to the minds of all the mu'mineen, brothers and sisters, that knowledge and ilm must be manifested in actions. Otherwise, it is fruitless. That you see, these great scholars, they were not only those who would teach, but people would be so inspired by their mannerism, their humility, especially Ayatollah Khoi. What did he have? Ayatollah Khoi, it is mentioned that he had one time, he has a sister. And when it came to somebody who wanted, or one of his relatives, his cousins or others, wanted to get married to his sister. But what happened was, he knew, Ayatollah Khoi knew, that his sister and that cousin had breastfed from the same lady for a continuous period of time, which makes them individuals who cannot marry. Therefore, he tried to explain this to his cousin or his relative, but his cousin would not have any of it. His cousin would become very upset and would cease relations with the marja', with Ayatollah Khoi, would not want to speak to him. Where does he live? In Karbala. Where is Ayatollah Khoi? Here in Najaf. What does Ayatollah Khoi do? A marja' taqleed. What does he do? He goes all the way to Karbala, knocks on the door of the man. The man finds him downstairs, does not want to open the door. Ayatollah Khoi repeats this several times, until what happened was that this man felt embarrassed, that this marja' or mujtahid at least, who's come at that time in order to seek reconciliation. Doesn't matter of his status or who he was, but he wanted to establish this brotherhood. He did everything for that purpose, and finally this was done. Another story we are told in Najaf at the time of the Baathists. What happened was that in Najaf they said that we want the pictures of all males and females. The government, they wanted pictures of all males and females except the females of the family of a maraja'. So Ayatollah Khoi's family were excused, they were exempted. There was a man who was quite high as far as being established here in the Hawza at that time, in the 70s, yet he was known for his animosity towards Ayatollah Khoi. He would walk in the streets and say, don't follow this man, he has no knowledge, he has this, this and this. The authorities came to him and said, you must give us pictures of your family. Of course, for the ulama, it's not easy. For us, it's quite simple to give the pictures of the females for passports and other purposes. But for the ulama, it wasn't easy. This man felt a great sense of embarrassment. Why? He didn't want to give the pictures of his family. So what did he do? The only way he could be excused is to ask Ayatollah al-Khoi to intercede for the government. So he went and he asked someone who knows Ayatollah Khoi to speak on his behalf. Someone came and said, you know that man who speaks against you all the time, walks in the streets of Najaf and directs talk against you, wants your help. Wants you to speak to the authorities so that the picture is not given. Imagine, what would you do? You would say, this is the moment where I can really seek revenge. This is the moment where I would not help him. True, Ayatollah al-Khoi at that moment, so Ayatollah Khoi at that moment would say, no problem, no hesitation. He picks up the phone, speaks to the governor of Najaf at that time in the 70s, and he says, you know that person? He is also a man of knowledge. In fact, I think he's more knowledgeable than me. It's so easy for us to hear this, but it's so hard to do. Someone who's speaking against you, to say to the others, your enemy, say he's more knowledgeable than me, in order to excuse him and his family from this particular practice. This is our ulama, this is our maraja', these are the beacons of light in our history that we seek inspiration from, and indeed they are our role models that we look towards and we must respect and we must honor. Indeed, in any shape and form, more importantly by praying for their long health and for their continuous service towards the religion of Islam, and specifically towards the madhab of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhimus salam. Now inshallah we will now move on, because we have only a few minutes of salah, for some small recitation of masa'ib. by Mullah Ali Najaf. Let's welcome him with salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
ثانية على أصواتكم.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله يا مظلوم يا غريب كربلاء. طبتم وطابت الأرض التي فيها دفنتم سيدي، فيا ليتنا يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي، فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. As we discussed earlier this morning, the musibah of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, and as Imam alayhi salam was struck, after being struck, an interesting narration appears that Imam alayhi salam looks at Ibn Muljim and asks his son Hassan and Hussein to loosen the ropes which are around the hands of Ibn Muljim because they were too tight for the man. And Imam alayhi salam is taken by his family, by Hassan, by Hussein, towards their house. And as Imam is entering the house, he looks at Al-Hassan and Al-Hussein and says to them, "My dear sons, let me walk, that Zainab might see me walking for one final time, because she's gotten used to her father walking and not being lifted." Imam alayhi salam is put inside his house. Al-Asbagh narrates, he says, "I stood outside of the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen." This is the same Amir al-Mu'mineen that we are visiting now. He says, "I stood outside of the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and Al-Hassan came towards us and says to us, 'Brothers and sisters, please disperse. My father Ali ibn Abi Talib will be just fine.' Al-Asbagh says, 'Everyone dispersed. I stayed standing because my feet would not move. I could not handle leaving my master Ali ibn Abi Talib.' He says, 'Everyone left. I stood standing. Imam Al-Hassan came out once again and looked at me. He says, "Asbagh, did we not tell you to go back towards your house?" He looks at Imam al-Hassan, he says, "Master, how can I leave when I know Amir al-Mu'mineen is struck inside?" He says, "Let me go inside and ask my father if you can come in." He says, Imam al-Hassan came out once again and says, "My father Ali says, come inside." And Asbagh narrates what he saw of Imam. He says, "When I entered the house of Ali ibn Abi Talib, I saw the Imam lying down on a bed. He had a yellow band around his head. I did not know what was more yellow, the face of the Imam or the yellow band." He says, "I came next to the Imam and I started to weep and cry. Ali ibn Abi Talib looks at me. He says to me, 'Ya Asbagh, la tabki, innaha al-jannah. Asbagh, do not cry, it is paradise.'" He looks at the Imam. He says to him, "Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, I know it is a paradise, but I cry for the separation of you, Ya Ali." Imam alayhi salam later on brings his sons, brings Al-Abbas and brings Lady Zainab. He brings Al-Abbas and Lady Zainab, and he puts the hand of Lady Zainab in the hand of Al-Abbas. He says to him, "My dear son, take care of Zainab. This is my amana towards you." "Oh Imam, I wish you were there on the 10th of Ashura, and you saw Lady Zainab being struck by Shimmer, and she is looking towards Nahr al-Furat. Ya Ba'an Abbas, wallah min ya Najiba, wallah min ya Were you not the one who brought me from Medina? Come now and take me towards Medina. Lady Zainab alayhi salam, when she walks inside the court of Yazid, she had changed so much from the tragedy she saw that Hind, the servant of Lady Zainab, did not recognize her. Hind was of Jewish descent, and she was the servant of Lady Zainab alayhi salam in Medina. When Lady Zainab enters the majlis, Hind sees her and she approaches her. She says to her, "Oh sister, tell me, which land are you from?" Lady Zainab says to her, "We are from the land of Medina." Hind now gets excited. "I have family from the land of Medina." She says to her, "Sister, tell me about the household of Amir al-Mu'mineen." She says to her, "Sister, which ones are you asking about?" She says, "Tell me about Al-Hassan." He says, "Tell me about my master, Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. Tell me about Lady Zainab." She says to her, "If you ask me about Hussein, then his head is on that spear. And if you ask me about Al-Abbas, we loved him with severed hands on Nahr al-Furat. And if you ask me about Zainab, I am Zainab standing in front of you. Ya hada ana Zainab al-Hajun عني يا بسليات المصايب وسيعلم الذين ظلموا آل محمد أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين يا الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. نسألك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم يا الله. Let's recite Aman Yajibu together 3 times and Ya Allah 11 times. In our narrations, brothers and sisters, one who recites Ya Allah 11 times, Allah replies stating, Labbaik Abdi, ask my servant. Especially the fact that we are here near Amir al-Mu'mineen, the doors of acceptance are open. Together inshallah we'll recite Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء. Together. أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء. أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء. يا الله 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 يا الله. اللهم شافي جميع المرضى يا الله. اللهم اقض جميع حوائجنا يا الله. زوار الحسين وامير المؤمنين واخواننا المسلمين في انحاء العالم احفظهم بحفظك يا الله. اللهم لا تسلط علينا من لا يرحمنا يا الله. Oh Allah, make us leaders within our communities يا الله. لأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات نقرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة تسبقها صلوات. اللهم صل على
Inshallah, brothers and sisters, we're going to recite Salat al-Jama'ah here, so if